So this brass thing was down there by the foot of the cross. And we have a laver, and we have the golden altar of incense, and then up towards where the head of God would be, or head of Jesus if he was on that cross, is the Ark of the Covenant. The sentience, the knowledge, the being of God would be there, be a fire. Remember the Shekinah glory that we talked about. On one hand, on the right hand, we have the candlesticks, and on the other hand, we have the table of showbread, representing the Holy Spirit and his promises. In Daniel 10:4, we read this. On the 24th day of the first month, so January 24, I guess it would be, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me, now this is Daniel saying, I went into a vision. There before me was a man dressed in linen. Remember, the outer court was made out of linen. Dressed in linen. The belt of the finest gold. Gold represents God. Around his waist. His body was like chrysolite. His face was like lightning. His eyes like flaming torches. If you remember, that Shekinah glory was a powerful source of light. And even at night, the pillar of fire that went up from the Shekinah glory illuminated the whole camp. Maybe he dimmed it a little bit when it was bedtime. I don't know. His arms and legs gleam like, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. In Revelation 1:12, we see the same guy. I'm thinking it's Jesus. When I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was someone like the Son of Man, dressed in a robe. Here's the robe again, reaching down to his feet and with a golden sash around his chest. His head and hair were white like wool. In the sanctuary, white represents purity. As white as snow. That's why they chose a white lamb, and it was wool. His eyes were like blazing fire. Same guy. His feet were like remember the brazen altar with the glowing coals and everything. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace. His voice was like the sound of rushing waters. How many lights were there on the menorah, if you remember? 7. So over on his right hand where the menorah was, his right hand held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp double-edged sword. His face was like, now there's some more symbolism because we're looking at the real Jesus. If they had all of these elements in the original tabernacle, they would just be like building the heavenly sanctuary on earth. And they didn't have the resources for that because the heavenly sanctuary is very different. We'll look at that in a second. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. Can you imagine seeing this guy? You're like, I can't stand. That's one of the reasons why people kneel when they pray, is because they're symbolizing, I'm too weak in the knees because I'm standing before God to be able to continue standing. Do not be afraid. This is God, or Jesus talking. Oh, first he places his right hand, the Holy Spirit. How does God talk to us today? He talks with us through the Holy Spirit. He places his right hand on me and says, do not be afraid. I'm the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, I'm alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. This is Jesus saying, I died on earth, but now I'm alive. And I know how to keep people alive forever and bring them out of the grave too. After his resurrection, Jesus explains all the symbols of the tabernacle to some disciples, so they can begin explaining it and making sure that people understand that he fulfilled all that stuff in the tabernacle. In Luke 24:25, these guys are walking along a road, and Jesus shows up. They don't recognize him at first, but Jesus shows up, walking along. Why are you guys crying? Huh? And they're like, didn't you hear that Jesus died? Man, you must not watch the news. So Jesus goes, he starts talking to them, and he tells them how foolish you are and how slow of heart to believe all the prophets have spoken. So they're not understanding that Jesus is risen. And Jesus says, you guys should understand that. You're disciples. You don't believe what all the prophets said about me rising again? Now, they still didn't recognize him at this time. Did not the Christ have to suffer for these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. So I explained this thing to him. When I think of Jesus living on earth, or the tabernacle where God resided, I think of that's like where God lived. And so for the longest time, when I thought of the heavenly sanctuary, I imagined that where Jesus is right now, that he was in a little cubicle, a little cube of purple fabric or something, and he was like sitting at the Ark of the Covenant. It was like his desk or something, and he's, I don't know, writing or typing or something, looking through the book of life. So I had that image for a long time. And then I read my Bible, and my vision of that changed a lot. In Daniel 7:9, it says, and this is Daniel having another vision now. He's seeing the heavenly sanctuary. As I looked, the thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Now, this in the sanctuary would be like the Ark of the Covenant. It's like with the seat of God. Took a seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head was white like wool. Remember the lamb and the purity image. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. Now, the Ark of the Covenant did not have wheels. So this is like one element that we're starting to add here. We're going to start building a little picture in your mind of what this thing might actually look like. We actually get to see this not too long from now, so anticipate. A river of fire was flowing. Now, if they did that in Israel, they would have burnt the tent down, so they can't do that. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. Remember, this is the throne room, and it has room for thousands upon thousands. Not only that, 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. That's a lot of people in this throne room. It must be big. It must be very big. The court was seated, and the books were opened. In Revelation 4:5, John, who had these visions of Revelation, he also gets to experience what this might look like. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings and peals of thunder. Now, there's a lot of like crazy, awesome physics going on here. There's a lot of power. Nuclear power plant kind of put it to shame, you know. God is extremely powerful, and his throne suits him. Before the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. Also before the throne there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. Most people say the laver of water represents this sea, and this is where people would come cleansed to stand before God. In Revelation 7:9 we continue. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count. Now, this guy's agreeing with Daniel. There's a lot of people here. From every nation, tribe, people, and language. Standing before the throne and in front of the Lamb, they were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. Now, if you remember when Jesus entered Jerusalem one day, they had Palm Sunday or whatever, and they had all palm branches and throwing their cloaks down and stuff, and so he gets a similar experience here. Maybe they're much prettier palm branches. When they cried out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." Can you imagine like a billion people all yelling that at the same time at the top of their voices? That'd be loud, and it'd be very true. The city was laid out like a square. Now, the city is the throne of God. This is his residence. This is where he's created this for people to be with him. The city was laid out like a square as long as it was wide. He measured the city. Now, he's apparently walking around with an angel who is showing him some different sights. He measured the city with a rod and found it to be 12,000 stadia in length, and as wide and high as it is long. Now, a lot of people say this is a symbolic length, a symbolic figure of space, because it's actually really huge. It says that it was as long as it was wide and high. So it's a cube. There's only 2 places in the Bible that a cube shows up. One is here, talking about this heavenly building, the city, and the other is when they built the tabernacle in the desert. And so those 2 places, I mean, they serve the same function, they house God, they're the same. Except one was, like, not very big. I could jump up and touch the ceiling. That would be irreverent, but I could jump up and touch the ceiling. And this one is much bigger. In fact, 1,400 miles by 1,400 miles by 1,400 miles. And I didn't include this part of the verse, but there's also a wall or a court, like there was in the original tabernacle, that goes around the whole outside of this thing. And this is my image that I used Photoshop and spent way too long making. Actually made me really late at night.